Hello, everybody, and great or good afternoon. It is Monday, and I'm excited to be with you. You guys already know me, so I'm going to jump right into today's live. I am still working on the scheduling of the posts. I'm not sure why it doesn't convert over. A lot of the schedulers will work properly, but I am certainly going to get that nailed down and maybe just try just manually posting them. But in either case, happy Monday. And I'm excited because today we'll be talking about things when it comes to residential leases that I think is so important and timely, especially as moratoriums begin to lift and as things begin to shift when it comes to buying and acquiring real estate over the next few months, right? As things change post pandemic, it's so important to be aware of those changes and to just, again, just be, understanding and sure of what you're doing and what you're putting out when it comes to these things. And so I thought of this just because, if you're a landlord, I'm a previous landlord. Even in those times, there were little small things I didn't even take into account that I didn't know, but we learned along the way. When our tenant lost their job, 30-day rules, 60-day things that need to be in place. Besides having conversations and having a great relationship, is so important that you're legally doing the things you need to do in your business. And so I thought because, we had great conversations, we were staying in touch, that's all I needed to do. And I learned from our real estate attorneys that it is actually different. There are some things that even in conversations, you need to be sure things are locked down, procedure and policy wise, when it comes to how you do that. So even in having great relationships, what we talked about on a previous live stream, is so important understanding what that looks like when it comes to our businesses. And so I just thought this was super important to touch on today because I've been a landlord, because I thought, again, having those conversations. Hey, Tim, how are you? I hope you're feeling well today, love. Having those conversations, I thought I was good, right? That having communication and great relationship with your tenants was really a great way of, progressing forward. But when she lost her job, it was so important that we had procedures and policies in place that we hadn't thought about before, even working with attorneys. And so I'm going to just share some things today going forward as moratoriums lift, as things change. This is so important to know as a landlord, but also as a business owner and as a consumer in real estate. I think it's so important that you know the rights of landlords, because you as well have rights when it comes to your personal property, when it comes to your investment as a tenant if you rent your home. And so it's so important to understand the full scope. As real estate is the biggest investment for most people, I just thought it was so important to talk about this. If it takes about a third of our budgets every single month, whether we're a business owner, whether we're parents, whether we are, educators, whatever walk of life we have, real estate is typically a lot of what we spend our money on. And so it's so important to be aware of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And of course, just because this group is geared towards entrepreneurs and small business owners, I'll be talking specifically for landlords and real estate investors. But again, it's knowledge I think you could take away. You could apply to business lease, business real estate. I think it's so important, again, to understand those different things. And so you guys know me. I have my notes right in front of me. So if you see me dipping my head, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just referencing my notes. And so, again, I thought about this because of a personal experience. I've always typically used just, general templates, but even general templates were not created in the best interest of everyone. And I think that's so important, a lesson I had to learn in kind of the tough way, and understanding that I thought I had it all together, but I learned that there's some nuances based on where I am, based on where you live, based on what state you operate in, based on some of your objectives and goals. It may be different for short term. For example, Airbnb is what we did. We also did long-term leasing. So depending on what side of real estate you do, there's also some different things you want to be aware of and to look out for. And so just through personal experience, I thought, why not discuss today's topic as the world opens up and things begin to pick up in real estate again. And not that it has stopped at all, right? But understanding what's expected there. So let's jump right into today. Some common things to avoid if you're preparing your residential lease, or if you've got a general one. I want you to be looking for these things. Maybe you need to make some additions or some amendments to what you currently have in place. And so I just want to start out with, everyone in this group is well aware of this, but I always just mention this: having a written agreement always trumps great relationships. I'm a really big talker, relationship girl. You know, it can feel awkward sometimes having a friend sign something, or having someone you've gotten in a relationship with to sign something, but it's so important that you do it. It's better than relying on handshake conversations, but if the lease fails to account for common situations, problems will likely arise for a lot of landlords. And so it's so important to know this, and tenants alternatively, right? And so mistakes or omissions in a rental agreement don't necessarily, doom a tenancy, but it can certainly harm it, and there can be potential issues that arise should tenants or the court step into the holes left in the lease. And so it's so important that you have an ironclad lease, that you have an ironclad agreement, because that is the precipice of one of your biggest investments, and you counting on that income and what's coming in for that. And so I've got a handful of residential, now I shouldn't say residential, I have a handful of landlords on our team who are a part of our collective. And so I definitely wanted to share this, guys, with you too. And so number one is not having a written lease at all. This is typically not the case for advanced, landlords, but again, when it comes to renting to a family member, sometimes that could be the case, right? And so it's so important that you have something in place. A verbal lease agreement could certainly hold up in some courts. That's certainly an opportunity. It could certainly happen. However, particularly if it's 12 months or less in duration when it comes to that type of lease, but relying on an oral contract runs the very real risk of dispute over the terms, right? Over the terms agreed to, or people coming up with claims or alleged violations of the lease without a written record. And so why not just take that proactive step to be sure you have something written out? Contending with arguments over who said, she said, what was promised is an unnecessary headache, and we certainly don't want to deal with that. We have plenty of other things to deal with in life in general. And so putting it down in writing can circumvent a lot of headache and a lot of stress on the back end. So number two is a really big one: failing to personalize the lease. I think this is so important because, like I said, most people don't have an issue with number one, but you'll find that there are a lot of people who run into not having a written lease agreement because of the relationship that's involved, or because of maybe doing a goodwill, or because that is just the type of person you are. There's so many reasons why a verbal agreement for a lot of people could work for them. But having that written agreement is a surety and protection on your behalf. But number two is one I see a lot more of often, and that is failing to personalize the lease. And so I'm going to read this really quick. It might be tempting to craft, a generic lease agreement, and guilty, hand up, that covers every future tenant, but there are no guarantees of future tenants and their situations, and the agreements stemming from those negotiations will conform to generic rental agreements. And all that means is this: every tenant is different. Every property management is different. There may be different people involved in the deal. There may be different people involved in the longevity of the lease agreement. There may be so many different things, particularly taking into account, again, where it is, right? If you're in a college part of your city, there may be different regulations you have to be aware of versus being in, a different part of your city where there's less restriction, right? And so just being understanding of that. So while you can use a framework for the basic elements of a lease agreement, it's so important to be prepared to make specifications for pet owners or smokers or any number of violations or variables that may be presented by potential tenants. This is so important because in an Airbnb once we had someone come in, and there's stipulations for all types of things, but there's also things that you never thought about. Someone wanted to come in, and it is a temporary, stay, so that's fine, but kind of do a day event. And it was something we hadn't thought of. You know, we thought of overnight guests, but we hadn't thought of renting out to someone who wanted to do a day event or a day stay. And so it's so important that you personalize these lease agreements, because there's going to be different situations that you don't think of that you never would have thought of happened in a million years. I hear different things every single week when I have conversations with business owners. And so understanding that. And so to that end, your lease should also specify whether or not tenants are allowed to make any alterations to the property. Obviously, that's a big one. And if they are, which alterations are allowed. A new coat of paint may be okay, but you don't want to be surprised if they knock down a wall and the place looks completely different than what you originally leased out to them. So, you know, just having those things in writing by the letter so that people understand what the expectation is, right? So number 3 is another one that I do believe is a common mistake you want to definitely avoid when it comes to writing residential leases, and that is not accounting for late payments. We live in a real world where everyone says, if somebody does a late payment, then I'm good. We have a contingency fund, or I can always place a judgment, or, you know, take them to court. But in a lot of cases, people will not pay you back. You know, you can do an eviction, you can do all these different kinds of things, but as far as monetarily, you know, recouping your money, you've got to have a plan in place. And so you can make explicit to your tenants that you expect rent payments on time and in full. But unless you put those same expectations into the lease, you run the risk of difficulty should your tenant fail to make timely payments. This is so important, or any payments at all. So it's up to you on whether to offer a grace period for payments, but your lease should detail the penalties for late payment of rent, as well as the steps you'll take for frequent tardy payments or non-payment. That's another one. If there's frequent tardy payments, and to some landlords, you know, making a late payment once a month may be once a month. Making a late payment once every 6 months may be too often, right? And to other landlords, are like, I don't care if they make a late payment, you know, every couple of months, that's okay with them. It just depends on what kind of business owner you are and what kind of landlord you are. So I think that's so important. And guys, let me know in the comments. I'd be curious to know, what state do you do business in? What state do you own your residency, own real estate, lease out real estate? I'd be curious to know. Let me know in the comments, guys. Hey friend, how are you? Welcome. And so just understanding that without those provisions, you fail to really pursue legal actions. If you don't already have this set up, like, it's going to be an issue. That's why you want your attorney firm reviewing this prior to. And it's so important. If you're not just using, well, most people are using generic forms. It's so important that it's personalized to who the tenant is, to where they are, to the zoning, to everything else, because it's different in every single place. Hey friend, how are you, love? And so these types of lease provisions will always offer a lot of different things, but you want to be clear when it comes to your terms, and you want to be clear for each tenant. I think that's so important. It's something I didn't learn in real estate until down the road. All right, so no fixed lease terms. This is important because I believe as the pandemic has happened, sometimes we get a lot more flexible as real estate investors or as landlords when it comes to the different things that we have to do in our business. And it just depends, right? It depends on what tenant you're speaking with. It depends on their current situation. It depends on what state you're in as moratoriums lift, what that looks like. You know, what did they set up when it comes to having contingency plans? And so a year is a long time, and anyone can attest how you feel today may not be how you feel a year from now, right? And who knew a pandemic would happen? But as well as a tenant arrangement may be working out, it's best to have a set term so that you can easily ask them to vacate for any reason at the end of the lease. That doesn't mean you'll have to look for a new tenant in a year's time. It's simply enough to sign a new lease with a tenant that wants to stay, or to include provisions to make renewal easy should both parties agree. However, this fixed term lease gives you flexibility to deal with bad tenants or changes in your situation. So I want to clarify that. I thought that was so good. It doesn't mean you'll be looking for a new tenant in a year's time. It means that you guys have an opportunity to review the terms of what you set out. Maybe those agreements aren't working for both of you. Maybe there's some terms in there that you can provide greater flexibility, or maybe you want to be more stringent going forward because this year has given you a history to reflect on and to look at. And so I think that's so important when it comes to what that looks like for each tenant and for each agreement. So I love that as a tip to moving forward. So the next one, allotting repair and maintenance responsibly. This is important to know who is responsible for maintenance and repairs. Am I responsible for the plumbing? Am I responsible for if the dishwasher goes out? Am I responsible? There's so many different things that come into play here. And so failing to address property upkeep in a lease can leave open the possibility of a dispute between you and your tenant in the future, right? Landlords have the responsibility of a certain level of maintenance under the law. So even if you give that responsibility away, you're still responsible as a landlord under the law for certain provisions, okay? As well as an obligation to keep a home safe and habitable by making necessary repairs. So this is a really, really big one. And jot this down. It's a balancing act to figure out what responsibility to take on yourself and what can be given to a tenant, okay? Too much on your plate can put you on the hook for time and expenses, while too much work shifted to your tenant may make them feel unreasonably burdened and ultimately tasks remain undone. And so you really want to be strategic here when you decide what your tenant is responsible for and what you're responsible for. You're first want to have a conversation with your real estate attorney and your real estate team on what am I legally responsible for. That's so important that you know that even, and I found this, some landlords may be giving their tenants responsibilities that they are not legally responsible for. Now, if they agree to that, you'll need to review it with your attorney, because if something did go down, you still may be responsible. And so that's why it's important to have a conversation with your real estate attorney who's well versed in this, who knows how to guide you along that journey. And I thought this as another tip, I thought this as another thing. When you're dishing out the responsibilities, you certainly want to take into consideration a lot of things, right? If they work 80 hours a week, how likely is it that the repair will be done in the correct way? Are they outsourcing repairs? Are they doing them themselves? Those are things you want to consider when you strategize what responsibilities your tenant will be responsible for when it comes to upkeep and maintenance, okay? All right, guys, the last two things, I want you to be clear on these because this is so big, so big. No deposit, no security deposit, I should say, or unclear terms, okay? Any lease agreement is going to begin from a place of trust. And let's be honest, we are human beings. That's why sometimes legal and all those other things don't sound like fun to us, because we're human. We don't want to include the law. Sometimes it may feel like it's this icky thing, but it's a protection thing. It's actually a form of communication. It's a love language to say, I care about my tenant. I want to be sure you're good. I care about my business and my legacy. I want to be sure I'm good. So there's a mind shift there. But obviously all those leases, they come from a form of trust first. But after all, you feel comfortable enough to let them live on your property, landlords should still take all the steps, all the precautions when it comes to safeguarding your rental, okay? So a security deposit can protect against damage caused by tenants or a tenant that leaves before the end of their lease term, and a well-written lease agreement with clear terms, guys, protects you against any future disputes about responsibility on what was agreed at the time of signing. So this is another big one, because I share with you guys, I had a tenant who loved that we were in constant communication. She had lost her job, and so we were willing to work with her. But that security deposit certainly bought us some time to cover the expenses of the rental. That was a blessing, and I'm glad we took that step. It was one I didn't necessarily want to take at the beginning. I read that it was something that a lot of landlords do, and so we took that step. But you may want to account for other things, right? If it's vacant for a certain amount of time, could you do other things? Could you get creative? What will you do next? And so having that security deposit covers you and even them, right? If you decide to take action on the back end, it may be less expensive to them since you took a security deposit. It may be less expensive to them to pay out the rest of their lease terms or whatever it is you guys agreed to. So there's some both way. It's a security blanket for you both, okay? And so the last one, lease terms that break the law. Can we talk about this? Because this is what this collective is for. It's a very much a safe space, okay? But let's talk about lease terms that break the law. So you go online, you get your general residential lease, you review it, you look it over, do. But did you have a real estate attorney review it? Did you have your business attorney review it? It's so important that we understand that things change as well. So have you had someone review your lease agreements over the past year during this pandemic, during the moratoriums, during everything that's going on? Have you had someone review them? Being the owner of a property doesn't automatically give you the final say in what can and can't be included in a lease. So landlords, of course, have some latitude, right, as an owner in what they stipulate in a lease, but each of those provisions is subject to the state and local laws. And nothing contravening the law would be considered valid should a tenant challenge you in court. And so it's so important from the beginning that we have structures in place that protect us, okay? Or protect you as a landlord, or even as a tenant, being aware of what the expectation is, okay? When you have a lease agreement that breaks the law, you're already starting off behind, unprotected, unsecured, the opposite of our goals when we jumped into this business, right? And so understanding that you have that in place. Things like required disclosures, late fees, notifications, and eviction procedures may be covered under state law. So in creating a lease, it's essential to adhere to the guidelines prescribed by the state. It's why I am a fan of forums and Facebook groups that we join and we ask a question, or we just ask our friend, hey girl, I know you've had real estate before. What did you do? It's so important that you check with your attorney as well. They're a part of your team. Check with your friends, check the forums, blogs, but you got to have it reviewed at the final end of that, right? Because they may be misinformed. They may be out of date information. It's so important that you've got this in place. And so one of the easiest ways to avoid critical mistakes in residential leases is to work with an attorney, well-versed in the laws governing lease and tenancy. And of course, you guys already know with this collective, you can work with a real estate expert provider attorney to review documents like a residential lease, all within, 24 hours of you signing up and being processed. I think that's powerful because, like I mentioned at the beginning, this is such a huge investment that people make in their lives. And I don't downplay what power it has. Even the feelings of walking into my home, I'm like, I'm just so grateful that this is my space, that I can breathe here. Emotionally, I can, lay down, I can rest, but it's nothing like not having things tied up for something to become untethered, to where it begins to unravel and these little things happen. You've seen friends post about different issues or different things they didn't know about going through the real estate process. And it's because we probably didn't know that, right? Every experience is different too. I thought after I bought my first home, I knew what I was doing. I was like, oh, I'm gonna know what the second process is like. And it was different. It was completely different. And so understanding, having an advisor, I think of attorneys as advisors, not as, oh my God, something went wrong, let me call. Proactively calling and asking these questions. And so I want to ask my audience today, did you know that there are programs out here that give you access to having a full attorney firm for your business for less than the cost of $3 an hour? Did you know that? That can be your highest hire, or your most affordable hire of the year, as we invest in coaches and marketing and sales programs, as we invest in CPAs and all the people who help us build our businesses and our legacies. Did you know there's programs that are available to us to have that type of access and that type of power, where you can pick up the phone without worrying about high hourly costs and you're able to ask your questions? Firms who are dedicated for small businesses to grow and empower themselves. So while we're small businesses on small budgets, we have big business resources. And that's one of the great things about this collective, and seeing you guys being empowered and take the next steps. I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited for you. You guys know to be a part of our programs and to have access to that, you've got to qualify. There's a few things, but I've found that the majority of the business owners I talk to who are serious about their business and who want to run it the correct way with an advisor along the way, they qualify. And so we ask some questions. We literally go through that together, and then we're going to see what's the best fit for you. Guys, I'm so excited that I was able to talk to you today. Let me know in the comments, just comment lease if you'd like to go ahead and set up a strategy call, a session. We'll get those questions answered, get you enrolled. That way you can be picking up the phone by the next few days. So you can get these questions answered, so you can have them reviewed and have your business starting off on the right foot automatically. I'm excited, guys. It's May, but the next time I talk to you guys, it is Memorial Day. I will not be here Memorial Day. Next Monday, I will not be with you all. I will be with my family. I'm actually going out of town this weekend, so I still may be there, but I believe I'll be back home. And I hope you guys have a fantastic Memorial Day. I look forward to it. Bye, guys.